everyone. Please help me welcome Alyse Bacine to the Heal with Cat podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today. I'm really interested on the topic we're talking about today, which is abandonment and all of the things around that wound. So welcome, and I'm happy you're here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we connected via, I think it was like random emailing. I was seeing if maybe we could connect on the podcast, do a swap. I ended up going on your podcast, so I'll link that in the show notes below so the listeners can hop over to that episode, because that was I feel like we went all over the place in that conversation, but in a good way, because it was like ancestral healing and.
Totally. Yeah, it was a great conversation. A lot of people really liked it. I got good feedback. So, yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to just start off the episode with understanding your story. And if you want to even touch on specifically why abandonment is such an important topic that you touch on so deeply. But let's get to know Elise a little bit more.
Yeah, so where to start? Well, I think this has been a lifelong journey for me, but I would say I really started getting into the healing work when I was 19, actually. So I discovered breath work when I was 19 because I started working at a yoga studio because I was just in a place in my life where I was really looking for answers and trying to understand why I was struggling the way that I was, because I was struggling with an eating disorder and anxiety. And I was just kind of trying to figure out why, because I didn't have any big thing that had happened to me in my life that would have, told me or made me understand. So I was just, looking for answers. So I started working at a yoga studio. And pretty quickly after that, I went to a breathwork class that they had there. And it just kind of drew me in. I don't really think anything major happened at that time, but it was just something that I knew I needed to do more of. So, pretty much right after that, I dove into training as a breathwork practitioner. And we're lucky in Philadelphia here. We have a really amazing breathwork community, and there's amazing teachers here. So, I started training as a breathwork practitioner, and I did like 4 years of training. I traveled all over following teachers, and I really started to heal in a lot of ways, as much as one can heal in their very early 20s. But, and I started teaching and sharing breath work at that time. So I was, teaching groups here in Philly. I was having private clients, but, I was 22, 23, and I don't think I was at the point in my life where I was ready to fully dive into that as a business. So, both my parents were teachers. I had a degree in secondary education and social studies, and I didn't really do anything with it right away. I moved to Tucson. I worked in restaurants for a while. But then when I came back, I was really like, okay, what do I want to do? And I did become a teacher for a little bit. And I was like, there's no way I can do this ever. But I saw the school counselor at that school, and I was like, I know I can do that job. That job, I know I'm going to be good at. So I went back to school and I got my master's degree in counseling psychology, and I became a school counselor. And I was a school counselor for over a decade, which I think really was an important step on my journey, because I don't think I would have been able to develop my methodology and my work and my business if I hadn't had all that experience working with traumatized children specifically. So, I was a school counselor. And then in late 2019, early 2020, I had gotten a new job that I thought was like my dream manifestation of a job. It was literally like everything I could have wanted. And by October of that school year, I was like, okay, this is not it. And I just started to kind of go down the path of, like, I started working with a coach, and I really started to realize like it was time for me to start my business. I think I always knew I would be doing something more than being a school counselor, because I knew I could impact people in such a bigger way. I just didn't know exactly what that was going to look like. So late 2019, early 2020, I started my business. And, it just so happened that was a perfect time to do that, because March came along and I went home from work and I never went back to work. So it was, initially I started out thinking I was going to be doing breath work with people. And then it just very quickly evolved into me creating my trauma tools and my methodology around healing childhood relational trauma and ancestral trauma through breath work and these other tools that I've created. And, just over time, it's gotten more and more articulate and clear and tight. And now I just have like these very clear processes that I use for people to dissolve the childhood trauma that is impacting them in their life now, specifically around feeling blocked or stuck with just moving forward in the ways that they want to, starting a business, discovering their purpose, creating the relationships that they want. So now I have, my main program, the Metamorphosis, where you learn all of these tools. And then I also have a certification program where I teach people how to implement my methodology with their clients. So, yeah, I think that's kind of the short version of it.
No, I love that because I think myself included, a lot of people who are in the spiritual healing space are probably nodding their heads like, yep, we all started somewhere. We had to build on our journey. We had to become educated on so many different things. We had to walk in the fire of our own path. And then here we are being of service from a place of experience and also learned knowledge as well, which I think your story beautifully speaks to. And I'm curious, you said earlier in your description of your early life that you hadn't had any like big trauma, right? And I think we bonded over that in our episode together. I was like, I didn't have any huge, crazy things. Like if you looked at my life from the outside, it was like, it's a pretty privileged life. But did you notice that as you started doing this educational work, did you start to realize, oh man, maybe this is part of my own human experience, or maybe there were complex traumas that I was experiencing day in and day out that attributed to these blocks in my life, or even just maybe a subconscious reason why you wanted to get into psychology in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I always just naturally understood human relationships so well, and like the depth and nuance to, why people relate the way that they do, the relational patterns. So that was always just something that was so interesting to me. So then when I started to dive into breath work when I was, younger, I started to understand the deeper, complex unconscious relational dynamics that go on within families. And I think that was kind of the start for me of understanding, like, oh, my parents were there for me in these certain ways, but they also were not emotionally available. They also didn't like see or acknowledge who I really am. Or, my mom really passed on a lot of her trauma to me through largely just not dealing with her own trauma and having manic episodes and freaking out. And I realized that like a lot of my fear and anxiety and just like the way that I related to the world in general was based around my relationship with my mom. And like I always joke with my clients, like when they talk about their moms and they're like, well, I don't feel comfortable really like publicly talking about, my relationship with my mom because I feel bad or whatever. And I'm like, well, I basically built an entire business around my relationship with my mom. So, at some point you just have to get comfortable with it. But and it's not even personal to her. You know what I mean? Like I always tell people, like, it's not about blaming, and you can have two things happening at the same time where you love your mom, but also she hurt you worse than anyone else. So I think it was really understanding those deeper subconscious, not really about what they did, but what they didn't do or what they weren't capable of, that created these unmet needs or wounds that just get projected in other areas of your life, like your relationships or, growing a business, for example. There's a lot of deep wounds that we aren't even aware of, that we are either projecting on other people or we are acting in reaction to or trying to prevent those things from happening again, which can stop us from doing things that we want to do. So that for me was more of like what I started to understand about myself earlier on, and then just continue to develop all of that as I worked with children and families and really just observed the different things that were going on in those dynamics.
Beautifully said. Dr. Gabor Mate, doing his compassionate inquiry short course right now. And I never thought personally that like emotional disconnection or like emotional neglect was like a big T trauma or like a complex trauma. And then it was in my EMDR session earlier this summer. And then it was followed up by learning about it in these courses with Dr. Gabor Mate, that actually the things that you named, not being seen, not being heard, not being acknowledged, or having that emotional security with your parents is actually huge T, big T trauma for a child, because that's their entire identity and worth is based off of if they're seen, acknowledged, and if they're in connection with their parents. So for anyone listening who, resonates with that, your emotional trauma that you have is significant, and it can be life altering for a child. So I really appreciate you touching on that, because it kind of closes the loop on a big conversation I think a lot of you and my clients have, like, oh, well, my mom, like, she wasn't able to be there for me emotionally because I was the youngest of 5 kids and I have a brother with special needs. It's like, well, yes, your mom was playing the role of like caretaker, but also it's possible that you felt neglected too. And to hold space for both of those truths is emotional maturity. And that's what I think we're getting at.
Totally. And then to bring it to abandonment, like I actually see that as a form of abandonment because you were neglected and you weren't getting what you needed. So, in that sense, you felt abandoned and betrayed. So, I think the abandonment wound, to bring it to that, can show up as a result of that, like the fear of rejection or the fear of criticism, or even just like the ongoing like inner critic is a like symptom or coping mechanism of not having that emotional connection or not feeling seen or acknowledged.
Take us a bit deeper into that abandonment wound. And I would love if you could show us or tell us about the effects of childhood abandonment, like starting in the childhood, and then what happens when we're adults and how that shows up. Because I don't think many people understand just how subconscious this stuff really is.
Totally. And I mean, there's obviously like the more obvious forms of abandonment when a parent physically can't be there. And then I think, there's obviously what we're talking about, which is the more underlying stuff. But I actually think, depending on the person, it can be just as damaging or affect them just as much. But, I always think of this one story. And this kind of thing happened all the time when I was a school counselor because I worked with a population that most of the families were like first generation from the Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico. So it was like this very close knit community. But a lot of times, what would happen in that community is the dad moved to Philly with like his new wife or whatever, and they're like, okay, this is a much better place to be. So they would send the kid here. So now the kid is here and he doesn't have his mom. So, the kid is now whatever in first grade and he's having all these behavior problems and the teachers are losing their minds. They can't get this kid to do anything. They can't get him to listen. They can't get him to do any work. And they're trying all this stuff. And then, like, I come in and I have a meeting with the parents and it's like, oh, well, his mom's not here. And I'm like, hello, people, like, why, like, a behavior chart or whatever the fuck is, sorry, is not going to like his mom is not here. Like, can we just start with that? Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's like so foundational to understand that too, that even, things that are not, my mom just didn't want me or whatever, but that are more circumstantial. Like I've had clients who, whose mom came to this country first, and was here for 6 months or a year and then brought the kids over, that kind of thing, where it's all with good intentions and out of love, but it still creates this huge hole or gap because as a child, you don't understand that your parent is doing this thing to better your family. You just know that my mom is not here. So that must mean, she doesn't want me or there's something wrong with me. So, it creates this huge hole in their identity and their sense of self, their sense of confidence, and just sense of like stability and safety in the world. So, and then just to bring it to something more subtle, you mentioned, I think, somebody whose parents had a brother who had disabilities or something like that, where there was a sibling who, like, I have a client right now whose brother was very sick when she was growing up. So, a lot of the parents' attention was going to him, obviously. And again, like that is another form of abandonment when a parent is not able to show up for you in the way that you need. They don't have the capacity, they're focusing on other things, or even if they're just dealing with their own trauma and they're not really able to be present for you, that also is a form of abandonment, because just because they're physically there doesn't mean they're able to be tuned in with you, be present with you, support you when you need support, and just kind of be tuned in. Somebody can be there and be completely not tuned in, and that can feel just as bad as them physically not being there, you know? And again, it depends on the person and the interpretation that they personally have of it, but sometimes that can be just as damaging as if someone's physically not there.
Hey everyone, it's Kat popping in during the episode today to tell you about my free cycle breaker quiz. Have you ever felt stuck in the same family patterns or unsure of the way that you fit in with your family? Maybe you feel like the black sheep. Well, what if I told you that you could transform that role into something powerful? With my cycle breaker quiz, I help you understand the childhood coping tools that are still showing up in your adult life today. And by understanding how you show up with your family and the role you play, this can be the portal into understanding the patterns of your lineage. Whether you're the parentified child, the comedian, the rebel, the hyper independent, or the caregiver, this quiz will give you the insights you need to reframe any resentment about how your childhood has shaped you. Once you take the quiz, you'll get a short and personalized podcast episode that dives deep into your archetype, helping you see the strengths you've gained from growing up in a maybe complex family. I'll share with you the potential challenges that you may be facing as this archetype, and I'll even give you a spirit animal to work with, because who doesn't love a spirit animal? The shift from black sheep to cycle breaker is a powerful one, and I want to support you along the way. Ready to embrace your role? Go to katdao.com/cycle breaker to take the quiz. That's KATDAOU.com/cycle breaker to take the quiz. The link is also in the show notes below. Your transformation from black sheep to cycle breaker starts right now. I want to take a little bit of a compassionate spin on this because it's something I constantly think about. And I know that we share a lot of similar values, is what I learned on your website and also in our conversation together on your podcast. But like for somebody who's listening, who's a parent, and they're like, I may have abandoned my child and I didn't mean to. I was trying to provide for my family, or I was a single mother. Like these parents that are put in these positions where they were trying to navigate their own life. And it's really easy for social media, what's hooky and trendy to be like, your parents abandoned you, like they're horrible people. It's like, well, let's turn that volume down a little bit, because in some cases, there is a lot of compassion to be extended to those parents. So like, how would you navigate that with a parent who's like, I think I may have passed this on to my kids?
Oh, 100%. I mean, this is like one of the biggest questions I get all the time, because one of the big things I do with my clients is around birth story and the, circumstances around your birth from conception to 3 months. And whenever they learn about that, they're like, oh my God, I know I fucked up my kid, whatever. And I'm like, okay, no, like it's fine. And the thing that I say to this all the time is it doesn't matter how old your kids are, when you do your own personal healing work, when you heal your own inner child, it has a reverberating effect on your kids. It doesn't matter like how old they are. And I'm not saying this because like I think it, I'm saying it because I've seen it across the board in very obvious situations with children when, and this would happen all the time. There would be a kid at school, who's in second, third, fourth grade, whatever, and their mom is a drug addict and she's not present. She's maybe not even there at all, or she might be there, but she's not present. And they have a lot of behavior problems. They don't do their work. They're kind of checked out. They're just not capable of, doing what they need to do in the school and being able to function. And then the mom gets off of drugs, she gets clean, she comes back and she's present in their life and she's wanting to be a part of their life. They change. And you don't have to say anything to them. There's no conversation about it. It's like, oh, wow, this girl is doing her work now. She's behaving. She's changed. Like, especially if they're younger. Like sometimes the older ones will have a little bit of like well, you can't tell me what to do because where the hell have you been? But it still impacts them and they still start to feel a deeper sense of stability, a deeper sense of safety. They're able to function better in the world because they have that person who's there for them. So, and I've seen this also with my own clients. Like I actually just had one of my clients on my podcast last week, and we were talking about her healing her own abandonment wound because she had and she talks about this on the podcast, so it's fine for me to share it. But she was talking about we talked about healing her own abandonment wound, and her mom left for certain reasons when she was 6, which obviously caused an abandonment wound. She came back and it was okay, but she was experiencing this thing with her daughter, my client's daughter now, who every time she would leave, her daughter would have these insane meltdowns and was so clingy to her that she could hardly ever leave. Like she couldn't go out with her friends, she couldn't go on vacation, she could hardly even go to the store. And once we healed her abandonment wound, we were actually talking on the podcast, and I was like, oh, yeah. And, how did your relationships with your kids change after you healed your abandonment wound? And she's like sitting there and she's like, oh my God, Elise, I just am now realizing that it's been like months and months and months since my daughter has had an episode like that. Like it doesn't happen anymore. And like, that's what happens. I see it all the time. So if you're a parent and you are worried about this, it's okay. Like, you don't have to talk to your kids about it. You don't have to make yourself feel bad. All you have to do is address it within yourself and heal and reconcile it. And there will be an impact from that, and they will be healed from that too, and things will shift. So I think, yes, that's a very important. There's no need to make yourself wrong or beat yourself up, because that doesn't do anything for you anyway. So yes, it's okay.
Yeah, it's the power of repair. It's the power of like that repair does more than the conflict, has more of an impact than sometimes the conflict. And it's when that conflict goes unrepaired that the wound, I think, still lingers. And I start wondering, is that happening on a quantum level? Like if we heal ourselves and those wounds, like then they don't reverberate and like you said, go out into the family system. And it makes me think of family constellation therapy because oftentimes in the first 3 or 4 sessions with clients, I'm not even past their parents' generation. I'm just still with them and their parents because that's how we're going to access what happened in the lineage behind their parents. But it's like first we have to deal with how is this wound that's been passed down showing up here in your immediate experience. And there's a lot of people who their parents will never do the work. They'll never look within themselves. And that in itself can feel abandoning, that you're on this journey, you're the one doing this work. And I think for the cycle breakers out there who are exhausted and tired and like, oh my God, I'm like carrying my lineage on my shoulders. Like, what would you say to them about their feel of outgrowing the family system and no longer connecting through like, I'm going to keep myself stuck to instead saying, I'm going to have to try to find a with you in another way because I need to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, and I understand that feeling, and I think that's kind of part of the process. But what I've noticed for myself and so many clients that I work with is that once you really start to heal and reconcile those relationships for yourself, then you're able to relate to your parents most of the time from a place of neutrality. Like, and there are things that you connect with them on, like for my mom now, like I say I'm like 99% neutral with her most of the time when, a lot of times it was hard for me to even like be in a room or have a conversation with her without getting annoyed. And there's things that we really connect on, right? Like my kids are one thing, right? Like we always can talk about that. And there's other things that we really connect on. And like beyond that, we don't really talk about anything else. And like, that's fine. Like, I'm completely happy with that. Like, I have zero need for my mom to understand my business and what I do and what I've accomplished or anything. Cause I have really like healed past like the need to be like seen or understood by them. So, and I think they are like happy for me. Do I think they understand what I do? No, and that's fine. But I think you can really get to the place where you can connect from a place of neutrality. You can appreciate them for who they are,
Mhm.
once the charge is gone, you know. But I will say, like, and not to minimize what you're talking about, because I've had these moments of being like, God, like, you fuckers, like, I'm doing all this shit and now you're all benefiting. Like, I'll tell a little story about this. So, my mom, like, one of the probably the biggest trauma that I feel like my mom passed on to me was the fact that when she was 19, she got pregnant and she had to give the baby up for adoption.
Oh,
And my mom was raised Catholic. So she was like sent to live at a home for unwed mothers. And it was like a very upsetting thing, which, like, what annoyed me so much about the whole thing a lot of the time was the fact that like I felt it more than her. Like, anytime I would talk about it, I would cry. And I feel like my mom was like so disconnected from it that it would annoy me. And I felt like I really carried it for her in a lot of ways. And obviously I've done a ton of work around that and stuff, but in 2023, the beginning of 2023, and this was, you know, her her kid was like 56 or 57 at this point. He found her and he reached out to her, and it was like this insane healing experience. Like, he reached out to her, they like really connected. He's like part of our family now, but like,
oh my gosh.
what one of the first things that he said to her when they like started talking was like, this is gonna make me cry. He said, like, it's okay, I had a great life. And it was like this like insane like healing experience. And I had this experience where I was just like, cool, well, glad that worked out for you guys. I feel like all of the work that I did like created these different like, and I'm not saying that was all because of me, like, I get whatever, but I'm just saying, like, I feel like there are certain experiences that I've had, that I've seen healing within my family, that I know is because of the work that I've done, that has
Mhm.
like a ripple effect. So, you know, and I'm so happy about that. And he's amazing and he's a part of our lives. And it's just, it's funny because he's so much more similar to my mom than I am. And they like talk all the time and like, he's amazing. But it was really just one of those things that I was like, you know, on a larger scale, it was like this huge reconciliation for my family and my lineage and my mom and the trauma. And I was like, you know, if I hadn't done this work, like, would this have happened? I can't say that it would or wouldn't, but just from looking at from that larger scale, it's just like, I understand the way that it feels that like you, it's all on your shoulders. You know what I mean? But I think that you can get to a place where you can feel neutral about it, or you can feel like accepting of it, because largely I think it's just more of a capacity thing as well. Like, now when I look at my parents, I'm like, okay, well, this is what they had the capacity for. And then once you really like reconcile your own unmet needs and your anger and hurt that of the way that impacted you as a child, then you're able to look at it as an adult and be like, okay, I get it. But you can't do that until you reconcile the child, because I see everyone trying to do that. Like, well, I understand why my mom was this way. And I'm like, okay, great, you understand, but like, your inner child doesn't understand. And that's what we need to address.
Yeah, I was just on this live call with Tim Fletcher, Dr. Gabor Mate, this other woman named Marissa Patton, I think, or Pattern. Anyway, she was saying something similar. She's like, there's a lot of people in today's modern age, because therapy is so widely normalized now, that know a lot about their trauma, but they haven't yet let themselves feel. And I think what we're seeing right now on a collective scale, and I just sent an email about this morning, which is crazy, but like, we're now seeing a lot of spiritual teachers move from the woo woo into the body. and start to find their joy and their peace and that reconciliation within themselves in their human experience rather than having to leave their human body, which is what their trauma taught them to do, to find that. And there's like a nice, like coming home and like a nice balance happening right now, I think, for a lot of people. And so that it kind of makes me think of that. Like it's just this coming home to yourself within, letting yourself sit with the abandonment and the feeling of that. And how does it show up for you? And how did it manifest for you? Because once you are able to really feel it, it's almost like it doesn't dissolve, but it almost, like you said, you find a peace with it and a neutrality with it that so the mind can't go. The mind can't get you there. It has to come through those inner experiences and that part of your inner child. I would love for you to talk about why we beat ourselves up when we're abandoned. Why do we as children blame ourselves when we are abandoned? Because I know for me, that was a huge one. It's my fault. I'm not good enough. And what was interesting is as I was doing my EMDR with psilocybin this summer, um, I started to see that the feelings that I had within me were the exact feelings of my dad, who I quote unquote felt abandoned by, which, yes, there is truth in that. But also, he was trying to go out into the world and prove that he could provide and that he was good enough and that the world could see him. And so here we are sharing this wound around worthiness, and we're just both navigating it in different ways. And yet I'm the one blaming myself, like it's my fault that I feel this way or that he abandoned me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, there's a couple of things. One, I think the reason why children always blame themselves is because the idea that your parents would be bad or they couldn't take care of you or they were not capable or they were hurting you, the idea that your parent couldn't do those things or couldn't be who you wanted them to be is too painful. Because if that were the case, then it's like, well, I'm screwed basically, because I need this person to survive and I need to know that they're going to be there to take care of me. So it can't be them, so it must be me, right? There must be something wrong with me. So that's one way that I see it internalized a lot, is it's just too painful to make that connection for kids, because you need your parent to be the one who's going to take care of you so that you can survive. It's a survival mechanism. So I think it automatically gets turned around into, well, there must be something wrong with me. So that's one thing. And then in terms of like the inner critic, that kind of thing, I think that it's a like preservation tool in a lot of ways, because I think that when you are growing up and you are not getting your needs met and you are not getting the love that you need, you are constantly trying to figure out, like, okay, well, who do I have to be to get my needs met? And how can I show up so that I'm not rejected or I don't feel abandoned or that I do get what I need? So if you're constantly trying to figure that out and you're editing so that you can show up and potentially get your needs met, it just becomes a thing that you're naturally doing. I was just talking about this with a client yesterday because she is like, she's creating a new like thing in her business and she's like, I can't turn this off. And I'm like, well, this is what it is, you know? It's your inner child sending you a message of like, I'm trying to make sure that I don't get abandoned. I'm trying to make sure I don't get rejected. I'm trying to make sure that I get my needs met. So instead of trying to push it away or make it stop, we have to give compassion to ourselves and our inner child in those moments. But yeah, that's largely where I see it coming from, is it's a coping mechanism. It's a way of attempting to get your needs met when you largely feel like they're not going to be.
I think it's also on top of that because I want to look at all of the different parts. And I think these are all kind of different parts of the same story. But I also would view that as a way of protecting the parent, as a means like if the only way to connect with a parent is to blame the self, if that's your only way of keeping connection with them, you're protecting your parent, you're protecting your savior, basically. I mean, I don't know if Stockholm syndrome is falls under that category, but it's a way to make sure that you get your needs needs met is, okay, well, I'm not going to blame my parent because it's too scary. That disconnection is too scary for me. And I'm also not old enough to understand what that would mean to blame my parent. I'm still a young child. And, so we blame the self. But I do see that often where children didn't have another parent there to like be the another shoulder to lean on. And so they will idolize their parent that is their abuser because again, it's like their only form of survival, and that kind of loyalty keeps us stuck. So for example, in family constellation therapy, oftentimes I'll see people struggle with romantic relationships, and they'll be like, I'm dating the same person over and over again. I know that it's my mom. I know it's the person who abused me, but like I can't seem to figure out why I keep choosing them. And one part of that is when we put them in the field and I put a piece of paper for a future partner and a piece of paper for their mom and a piece of paper for them, they will put their mom in the place where their partner belongs, because they're technically in an emotional relationship with their mom or their dad because they're still looking for their validation and approval. You can't make room for a romantic relationship if you've got a parent who's in that role in the family system. So it's just really interesting to look at loyalty and all of that.
Yeah. And then we always will attempt to get our unmet needs met through our relationship. So obviously they'll pick somebody that's like their parent because they're trying to get their needs met from their parent.
Yeah. You've taken us through this beautiful storyline of the effects of childhood abandonment and how it happens, and we've talked about all of these really nuanced positions where somebody could be in if they have an abandonment wound, big ones, small ones, all different kinds. And I think I'm so excited for this episode to come out and the listener to hear it, because I think so many of us are struggling with abandonment wounds and don't even realize that we're going through it. But let's just say somebody listens to this and they're like, okay, check and check and check. I've got an abandonment wound. Where do they go from here? And we've kind of talked about it, but I would love if you could give us some more like streamline or like directives that people could be like, okay, I can go and book this session, or I can go do this thing now and I can start addressing this.
Yeah. So the most simple way is, that I've created is my inner child healing process, where you really go through 5 steps of how to pinpoint what it is, where it's showing up, and then shift it in the moment. And I use different trauma healing tools, breath work, but it's a process that once you get good at it, you can start to shift it in the moment. But I think largely the first thing that I would say to somebody is really being able to see the way that it's showing up in your life now, or the places that it's showing up, because you can know that you have it, but a lot of times to be able to bring that awareness in the moment to things that are happening in your current experience can be a little bit more challenging, So I would start there to be like, okay, well, if it's around your mom not being emotionally available, and it's not always going to be literal, like it's not always going to be apples to apples, where it's like, okay, well, my partner is also not emotionally available. It might be that you're not emotionally available, or it might be that you guys like flip flop those roles. It's not always going to be an exact thing, but I think that's a place I would start too, is just looking at like, and it's not about the circumstances, it's about the feeling. So, what is that feeling that I felt most of the time growing up around my parents, right? And again, we want to be able to bring it out of the head and into like, what does it actually feel like for me to feel like I'm not seen, or I'm not valued, or no one is paying attention to me, or no one is acknowledging me? Like, what does that actually feel like, that feeling in my body? And then where else am I feeling that in my life now, like in my relationships or in my business or at work or whatever it is? So I think that's a really good place to start, to have awareness around. Because a lot of times I notice that that can be a sticky place for people to be able to see it, because a lot of times we get so wrapped up in the circumstance or what this other person is doing that it's hard to see that it's actually the same pattern, because it's not the same circumstance, but you feel the same. And that's what we want to look at. So I would say to start there. And then, if you want to try my inner child healing process, you can do that. You can get it for only $33. I would say that's a great place to start because, one of the things that I feel so passionately about when it comes to this is feeling your feelings because you can know this stuff all day long, but if you don't go into the feelings and feel them, then nothing's actually going to change. It's just going to be intellectual. And the breath work is a really efficient way to do that. And, that's what I take you through in the process. And then you just gradually get better and better at being able to pinpoint when and where this is showing up. And then gradually in the moment, you learn how to address your inner child and give your inner child what he or she needs in that moment. And then you can come back to accessing your own power. So that's kind of the like where we're going with this, but it takes a little bit of effort and it takes willingness to go into your body and your feelings. But I've seen my clients have insane success with this, especially the ones who've really taken the process and made it their own and really practice it over and over again, that they're really able to shift in the moment, especially things around like business stuff where it was, like fear of showing up online or fear of sharing stuff. And now they're able to do that very easily because, they've mastered this. So I think that once you really start to be able to have that deeper awareness of like what's actually going on and then go through the steps to shift it, feel your feelings, you can start to be able to hold your power in situations where you usually would feel triggered or you would feel challenged or stuck.
And as somebody who tried to heal my abandonment wound alone, doing it in community, doing it with someone else is probably the best way to learn that you can trust people and that people can be in your corner and support you and that you're not going to be abandoned just because you have these vulnerable wounds that you've been struggling with. So if people want to work more deeply with you, do you have options for that as well?
Oh yeah. I mean, I recommend that. You can do the inner child healing process on your own, but I like to like, show people like this is what it is, this is how you do it. But along with the community aspect, which is incredible. And, so many of the women who come into my programs are like, oh my gosh, it's so great to be connected with people who are not only supporting you, but you also get to see that what you're dealing with is not that different from what someone else is dealing with. Like it's all different, but it's all the same. And to be able to feel that like validation and acknowledgement is really great also. And then the other thing too is, with stuff like this, a lot of times it's not easy to see what the thing is for you. Like you can see it to a certain degree, but then to be able to have my insight and see what I see, usually I'm going to be able to see something that, I mean, always I'm going to be able to see something that you can't see just because it's you. So I think from that lens, it's very important to get support around it as well. So I have my program, The Metamorphosis, which is 3 months where you learn all of this. And then you can continue for a year in my membership, which most people end up doing because they want to keep getting support with the work. So that's the best place to do it.
We'll link all of that in the show notes. So if someone's listening and they feel compelled to dive deeper, they can reach out to you. I'm so grateful. I know today we just scratched the surface of abandonment, but what I love about this kind of work is that, we can provide the interest points on the podcast, but really everyone's abandonment story is so nuanced and so unique to them, even if there's through lines of common threads. Like, so don't be afraid if you're listening to like lean into this. Your abandonment story matters. It may be having a huge impact on your life. I know that it was having a huge impact on my life. And it wasn't until I did EMDR where I stopped intellectualizing it and I started feeling it in community with people that I trusted that I was like, Yep, I totally understand the story of my life now. And 95% of the things that I've done, the choices I've made, the people I've dated in the past, all of that came from a place of my abandonment wound, and understanding it gave me so much freedom. So I just want to thank you for like dropping some huge nuggets of wisdom today and guiding people through their own inner awakening around it. And if people want to connect with you deeper, aside from what you've already shared, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram, Elise_breeze, my podcast, Reclaiming Consciousness, which you were on, and then also my website, EliseBreeze.com.
All right, we'll link all that in the show notes below. Elise, thank you so much for being on the Heal with Kat podcast this week.
Thanks for having me.
All right, guys, if you like this week's episode, you know what to do. Rate, subscribe, review, share it with someone who would benefit from listening to this week's episode. And we'll see you next week on the Heal with Kat podcast. Thanks, guys.